161 DC. Two men sat on the throne of Rome. This had never happened before. The Roman constitutional system, built over centuries of republic and empire, refined through civil wars and succession crises and the accumulated political wisdom of the most administratively sophisticated civilization the Western world had produced, had no framework for it. One emperor. One purple robe. One man at the center of the machine. Marcus Aurelius had two purple robes made. The senators who watched the ceremony understood immediately what it meant and what it cost. It meant that Marcus was giving away half of something that no one had ever voluntarily shared. It cost him nothing he valued, the power itself had never been what he wanted, and everything that the political system around him had been designed to protect. He did it anyway. Lucius Verus was not Marcus Aurelius. Everyone in Rome knew this. Lucius knew it himself. He was intelligent enough to understand the gap between them without being philosophical enough to be destroyed by it. He liked chariot racing and dinner parties and the specific pleasures of imperial wealth that Marcus had been training himself to be indifferent to since childhood. He was handsome, gregarious, popular with the soldiers in the way that physically imposing men who enjoy military pageantry tend to be popular with soldiers. He was going to be useful. Marcus was about to find out how useful. Because 3 months after the two emperors took the throne together, a message arrived from the east. The Parthians had crossed the Euphrates. 2 months into his reign, Marcus Aurelius was already at war. He sent his co-emperor east while he stayed in Rome governing the empire alone. What came back from that war, carried on the boots and in the lungs of the returning legions, killed more people than the Parthians ever could. This is the episode where the philosopher discovers what governing actually cost. Subscribe, like the video, and let's get into it. The Parthian Empire was Rome's only peer. To the east of the Euphrates, stretching from Mesopotamia to the borders of India, the Parthian Empire had existed as a counterweight to Roman power for 3 centuries. The two empires had fought, negotiated, drawn borders, violated those borders, and fought again in a rhythm that both sides had come to accept as the permanent condition of Eastern geopolitics. In 161, the Parthian king Vologases IV decided the rhythm had shifted in his favor. He was not wrong about the moment. The transition between emperors was always a period of potential instability, the new men still finding their footing, the legions still assessing their commanders, the administrative machine still calibrating to new instructions. Vologases moved fast. His forces crossed the Euphrates, destroyed a Roman legion in Armenia, and installed a Parthian client king on the Armenian throne. Rome had not lost a legion, an entire legion destroyed in the field, in decades. Marcus needed a response. He had 2 options. He could go east himself, leaving the administration of the Western Empire in the hands of subordinates. Or he could send Lucius. He sent Lucius. The decision looks on the surface like a calculated risk, sending the less capable emperor to manage a military campaign while the more capable one stayed home to run the empire. But Marcus's reasoning was more subtle than that. Lucius needed to be useful. He needed to be seen as useful, by the Senate, by the legions, by the eastern provinces that were going to bear the cost of the war. An emperor who never did anything was a political liability. Lucius went east with the best generals in the Roman army. The generals won the war. Lucius Verus arrived in the east in 162 and immediately demonstrated both his strengths and his limitations. His strengths: he was physically present, which mattered enormously to Roman armies that needed to see imperial authority in the field. He was popular. He gave speeches well. He wore the armor convincingly. He understood, at an instinctive level, the performance of military command even when the substance of it was being provided by the generals around him. His limitations: he spent most of the campaign in Antioch. Antioch was the largest city in the Eastern Empire, wealthy, cosmopolitan, full of the theaters and dining establishments and chariot races that Lucius genuinely preferred to the discomfort of field command. He directed the campaign from there, leaving the actual military decisions to Gaius Avidius Cassius in the south and Statius Priscus in the north. Cassius and Priscus were extraordinary commanders. By 163, Priscus had retaken Armenia. By 165, Cassius had pushed deep into Mesopotamia, past the Euphrates, past the Tigris, all the way to the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon, which his forces sacked and burned. The Roman legions stood on the banks of the Persian Gulf, further east than any Roman army had been since Trajan 50 years earlier. It was a complete military victory. Lucius celebrated it in Rome with a triumph that the sources describe as spectacular. He took the title Armeniacus, Parthicus Maximus, Medicus. He commissioned statues. He gave speeches. The generals who had actually won the war received appropriate recognition. Marcus, who had spent 3 years in Rome managing the empire alone, received Lucius back with the warmth of a man who had genuinely missed his brother and was genuinely glad the war was over. Then he looked at what the legions had brought back with them. The returning legions carried something from Mesopotamia that no Roman general had planned for and no Roman administrative system had a protocol to handle: a plague. The sources disagree on its exact nature. The description suggests smallpox, or possibly measles, or some combination of infectious disease that a Roman population with no previous exposure had no immunity to resist. What they agree on is the scale. The physician Galen, who was in Rome when the plague arrived and who left the city when he realized what was coming, and who felt guilty about leaving for the rest of his life, described symptoms that spread through the population with a speed and lethality that had no precedent in Roman experience. It reached Rome in 166. By the time it burned through the empire, moving along the trade routes, the military roads, the river systems that connected the provinces, it had killed, by modern estimates, between 5 and 10 million people. Perhaps a quarter of the population of some affected regions. In certain areas the dead could not be buried fast enough. Marcus responded with the tools available to him. He organized grain distributions to affected cities. He freed gladiators from their contracts to serve as emergency labor. He had the dead removed from Rome at imperial expense when private burial became impossible. He issued edicts regulating the disposal of bodies, the quarantine of affected populations, the distribution of medicine from the imperial stores. None of it was sufficient. Nothing would have been sufficient. He wrote about it in the Meditations, not about the plague specifically but about loss at scale, about the way that history moved through civilizations like a river through landscape, shaping and destroying without moral intention. About Marcus Aurelius's obligation, in the face of things he could not control, to control what he could. He controlled what he could. It was not enough. It never was. While the plague was still burning through the empire, the northern frontier broke. The Germanic tribes north of the Danube, the Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Sarmatians, a coalition of peoples that Roman frontier policy had been managing through a combination of military pressure and diplomatic bribery for generations, crossed the river in 166 in numbers that overwhelmed the frontier defenses. They did not stop at the frontier. For the first time since the Wars of Augustus, Germanic forces pushed deep into Roman Italy itself. They reached Aquileia, a major city at the head of the Adriatic, the gateway to Italy from the northeast, and besieged it. The psychological impact on Rome was enormous. The Danube frontier was supposed to be permanent. Italy was supposed to be safe. Neither was true anymore. Marcus had been emperor for 5 years. He had spent those 5 years managing a war in the east, a plague that was killing millions, and the ordinary administrative demands of governing an empire of 50 million people with a co-emperor who was better at triumphs than governance. Now he had a second war on a second frontier inside the borders of Italy. He did what he always did. He worked. He raised money for the campaign by selling imperial furniture and art at public auction rather than raising taxes on a population already devastated by plague. He recruited gladiators, slaves, and Germanic mercenaries to supplement legions depleted by disease and the Eastern campaign. He reorganized the command structure of the northern frontier. And then in 168 he went north himself. He took Lucius with him. They reached Aquileia together in the winter of 168. The campaign was going well. The Germanic coalition was being pushed back across the Danube, the frontier was stabilizing, the combination of Roman military pressure and Marcus's diplomatic intelligence was producing results. The two emperors were together for the first time in years, working in the field rather than separated by the width of the empire. In January 169, on the road back from Aquileia toward Rome, Lucius Verus suffered a stroke in his carriage. He was 38 years old. He died 3 days later. Marcus rode with the body back to Rome. He organized the funeral with the care he brought to everything: the deification ceremony, the public mourning, the practical administrative transition from 2 emperors to 1. He did not perform grief. He felt it. The Meditations do not record the specific moment. They were private notes, not a diary, but the text around that period shows a man returning, again, to the Stoic instruction that loss is not an argument against life. He had buried children. He had buried his teacher. He had buried his adopted father. Now he buried his brother. And then he went back north. The Germanic wars had not paused for Lucius's death. They would not pause for anything. Marcus Aurelius spent most of the next decade on the Danube frontier. This is the fact that the popular image of him, the contemplative philosopher, the man of books and marble libraries, consistently fails to account for. He was, for the majority of his reign, a field commander. He slept in military tents. He ate campaign food. He managed the logistics of armies in the field, the diplomacy of Germanic tribes, the administration of an empire from a distance. And at night in his tent he wrote. The meditations were written here. On the Danube. In the field. By a man who was simultaneously the most powerful person in the Western world and a person who had profound doubts about whether power was worth having, whether the empire he was defending was worth the cost of defending it, whether the philosophical framework he had built his life around was adequate to the reality he was living in. He never resolved these doubts. He wrote them down instead. Book after book of the private journal. Instructions to himself, philosophical arguments with himself, the record of a mind that refused to stop examining itself even under conditions that would have silenced most minds entirely. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He wrote it in a military tent. He wrote it during a war. He meant every word,